Aaron.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, welcome back.
Thank you, thank you.
How was your break?
Really lovely.
Yeah.
Quite relaxing. The weather here was pretty abysmal, but
Yeah.
you know,
Was it a staycation or were you guys traveling anywhere?
pretty much as just a staycation. I think maybe the furthest afield we went was like Evanston, which is maybe maybe 10 miles away. But yeah.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Jude, how's it going?
I'm good. You?
Good, good.
How was your week?
It was very relaxing. Yeah. Can't complain.
How's Chicago in the fall?
So it is basically just like continuously raining in the fall usually. Though you get some like nice crisp fall days. Fall is generally speaking my favorite season, so it's usually pretty nice here.
Cool. Let's see who all is here. Are we waiting for anyone?
I think we can start.
All right, awesome. Go ahead and share my screen.
Cool. So we can let Jude run through the board as we do normally. But I just wanted to take a few minutes at the outset to just talk about, do a check-in on Krypton and really just talk about planning and estimation. I think I've spoken to all of you individually at this point. I really think we need to get much better at planning and estimation, being able to, both create predictability for ourselves, but then also everyone else in the community. Of course, there are practical challenges, and I don't mean to say that, this is an easy problem by any means, but I think it's worth setting ourselves up for a higher standard. And at least I would like us to kind of refuse to say, complexity is the problem here, or that unknowns are the problem here. I think we can get materially better, and we need to make a deliberate intention and sort of effort at doing that. So I put in some thoughts here. Happy to have an open discussion, but just wanted to throw it out there. And if people have any thoughts on that, maybe we can just go around the room if folks want to share or chime in with any perspectives. And then we can talk about Krypton specifically. Anyone want to chime in?
Yeah, I think that these 4 tips and probably the top 3 seem to me like good steps for improving our planning. I think like one of the big failures we have is that generally our estimates are okay for when a PR is going to open, but our estimates don't usually factor in time for PR iteration. Like we could probably do some work to improve PR iteration turnaround time, like just be better and more proactive about communicating like when updates have been made to a PR and you're ready for the next set of reviews. Like there's things we could do to speed that up, but in terms of our estimation, like we're just more or less not factoring in PR review times.
Anyone else?
I think that also maybe something that we could maybe improve is so when we are giving some guesstimates, we are usually being optimistic, and maybe we should just have a constant factor, like multiply by 1.5 or whatever. Just
Yeah, I think that's a good hammer, and I would like us to at least make progress towards making that a little bit less brute force. But you're right. Worst case, we can choose like a large enough multiplier and work to sort of tighten that estimate, than to start optimistically and work to loosen that estimate. I think that's a reasonable approach to take. Sure.
To speak to that tactic, I feel like this information should actually be hidden, at least on like a quarterly basis, because the if it is known but that we're all going to multiply our estimates by 1.5, we will adapt our estimates.
Yeah, so there is the Parkinson's law problem that
Yes.
you can inflate the estimates and you will fill up that time. So again, I think maybe the pendulum it needs to swing a little bit, and maybe we'll overcorrect. But where we are right now is it's not working. So we need to change some things. We can't continue to keep operating just like we have. So whether it's these tips that work, I'm open to sort of ideas. Just wanted to raise sort of the issue and make sure that we are taking it seriously. So talking of PR merge times, I pulled in some numbers here. I don't know if you're able to access this link. I think since GitHub acquired PullPanda, they've disabled new signups. So if the link doesn't open for you, I can continue to provide the raw numbers. And it's also relatively easy to pull these numbers and do the calculations ourselves if you really have to. But yeah, over the past 3 months, our sort of average PR merge time was 5 days, and that's the average. We do have quite a long tail of PRs that are open for significantly longer. So there's at least 10 PRs over that time period that were open for, let's say, 22 days or longer. Over the past month, even the average is actually quite high, 9 days. And so we have several PRs that take 2 weeks to merge. So if we just look at where we are today with Krypton, we have 4 PRs that are outstanding. I think Jude is working on a PR that's likely to be a very large PR that is not even out for review yet.
It's just
Sorry?
tedious. It's not large, it's just tedious.
Sure, let's say tedious. Regardless, I doubt that it would be a very quick PR to kind of review, and it would likely require some iteration. So just looking at sort of where we are, I would like us to talk about what is a reasonable estimate, factoring some of these things, taking into these things in mind. So I guess first, let's just talk about the 4 PRs that are in flight that have gone through some iterations already. Like how far are we on each from getting them to be merge ready? And then maybe Jude, we can get an update from you.
Well, let's look at the first one. This is Aaron's PR against Next. That fixes the crashes that we've been seeing due to inconsistencies between the sortition DB and the Marv state. Don't see any comments. I know that I haven't looked at it yet because I've been working on my own PR. Ludo, have you taken a look yet?
no.
So
I think I started, but yeah, I'm not done.
So one thing I would caution about here is that like this PR has a handful of, like it does a handful of interesting changes to the Marv. Like there's a handful of things that need to be checked, but for the most part, this PR is like a ton of sort of tedious refactoring in the various databases that use the Marv. And so if your networking PR is also mostly tedious changes, to prevent this from being like something that you're going to have to repeat work on, or someone is going to have to repeat work on, we should find out very quickly whether or not this PR is going to conflict wildly with the PR that you're going to open on the networking changes.
Well, but honestly, I'm pretty fast at fixing conflicts. Even if it's due to semantic changes in the Marv, like I'm sure the code isn't changing that considerably.
Okay.
You want to correct that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think just double check, like maybe do like a test merge into your branch, create a new branch and test the merge to see what's going to be conflicting, because like it could easily be 1,800 lines of conflict.
Fun. Okay. Question for you then about this. Can I still, the biggest thing that the networking code in general needs from the sortition DB is a read-only reference. Is that still?
So it's only possible on non-transactions. If you have an open transaction, you can't have a non-mutable reference.
I think that should be fine, but I do know that the networking code does use the index dbcon at least.
Yeah, then that should be usable without a mutable reference.
Okay, because that would significantly upend the design of the networking stack, which is built on this idea that the networking stack only has a read-only view of the database.
Right.
But it sounds like that's still the case.
Yeah, that should still be the case for the index dbcon. It just shouldn't, like it will never be able to read any in-flight data in a transaction.
Right. I don't think we require that in the first place. That sounds like a consistency violation.
Yeah, I mean that was not the case before this PR. Like you would be able to read data that was in flight.
What's that?
Oh, sorry, that was previously not the case. So like you would be able to read data that was in flight.
Right.
Yeah.
That led to problems.
Yeah.
Any other notes for reviewing that you want us to keep in mind besides the fact that this is a lot of tedious refactoring and
you also, this is you dropped the previous version of this PR and open a new one, right?
Yes.
I think there were already some comments on the previous version.
I don't think there were.
Oh, okay.
I can look back at that PR. So like that one was opened against master and this one's open against next. I think in terms of where we are with in-flight PRs and trying to march towards Krypton, like it's way more important to review this against next. Like if master is broken until we merge next, that's, I don't think that that's that serious.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments on this PR?
All right, let's go to the next one.
All right. Cool. Looks like we still have a failing test here.
Yeah, and there's more too.
Is this ready for review, Pascal? Or
No, not yet. They're still working on it, and actually, since I changed some timings to make it presumably more reliable, actually it fails in more different, interesting ways than I'm trying to go through. So I need a few more days at least to.
Would we consider this a Krypton blocker? Question for folks.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Unless the first fix doesn't give us like a 80% minor quorum.
This is the fix that's already been merged in next, but not in master.
Yeah, that fix is already in next, and
Okay.
I'm actually trying to remove that fix to make it looking for blocks, for the correct blocks, but somehow the threads are not communicating correctly, or maybe that's my test bench that's not doing something right. But I've been working through it.
Okay.
But it's not per se a blocker, I would think.
All right. Yeah. Let's just make a note then that this is not a blocker for Krypton, and we can continue. And you'll tag folks when you think it's ready for review.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
all right. Thanks, Pascal.
Sure.
All right, this is Ludo's work on top of the sortition using recipients and reward sets, excuse me.
And Jude, looks like you approved it yesterday, right?
Yeah, I just had a few minor comments. And
should we talk about that comment on 1850, or maybe it's part of the next PR?
Sorry, 1850, that is...
This was the change that Ludo had made. I forget which PR it's a part of, but you know, it's to do with, yeah, I guess it's in this.
I need to go back actually and comment on this, because when looking at the branch that merges 1850 and this together that we submitted for security audit, I think there was at least one problem for using the recipient set. So I actually need to go add a comment at least on this.
Okay, but there was some discussion about, you know, the cost of you know, doing some reads and writes in the MARF versus you know, clarity operations, and contrasting those two and doing a trade-off between readability of the code base versus making the code base harder to understand. So
yes,
I think it'll be good to get to a resolution on that in this meeting if possible.
Let's do that right now. I don't think it'll take very long.
Okay.
So here's the first one about costing for debiting and crediting. Just a bit of background for people on the call. Part of the design of POX stacks lockups is that the act of locking your tokens will actually truly render them unspendable for a temporary period of time, because they are locked for POX, and that information is percolated down into the node. It actually lives outside of the Clarity contract that implements the bulk of POX. But in order to stave off some potential denial of service problems, the tokens unlock lazily. So that is, if you try to spend tokens that were locked, but they are no longer locked at the time that you try to spend them, the act of trying to spend them will update the database lazily on the spot in order to unlock your tokens, as opposed to processing the unlock eagerly, which could have been an alternative we took, but we did not take, because the act of determining who to unlock and when is actually pretty expensive. In the PR that I sent earlier, the act of sending tokens is what unlocks them. So you pay a transaction fee, your tokens get unlocked. You do a stacks transfer or a stacks burn, your tokens get unlocked. You try to stack again, your tokens get unlocked, and then they get relocked. When Ludo took the reins on this PR, he had made a change where the act of crediting tokens can also unlock them. And I had pushed back on this, saying that I don't think that's fair, because the sender should only unlock their own tokens, not somebody else's. And that led to a kind of long conversation about that had to do with another related issue of how we represent the locked state in the MARF. And I had argued that the act of trying to store all of the lock records in a single MARF record is more expensive from the VM's standpoint than trying to store them individually, even though it would lead to more MARF reads. And that, I just posted this comment about 30 minutes ago, asking for clarity, just about how we intend to account for extra MARF reads in the VM cost model. Because what I do not want to have happen is for the block fill to increase unnecessarily in the act of processing lazy token unlocks. But I also want to make sure that the VM accurately accounts for all of the IO operations that occur, so that we don't find ourselves in a position where like a block can be, you know, have X IO operations, but like we have to process 2X IO operations to make that happen, or something silly like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess the answer to your question in this issue is that these are actually, as far as the VM is concerned, these are like different dimensions of the cost.
Okay.
So there's like a fill for the number of bytes read and written, and a fill for the number of MARF reads and MARF writes.
Which, sorry for interrupting, but which variables in the simple cost, whatever it's called, structure account for this? Because I don't think that's documented anywhere.
So one is number of reads,
So read count and write count?
Yeah, there's read count and write count. And then the other is read length and write length.
So read count and write count are Marf operations.
Yes.
Okay, I did not know that.
And so, yeah. So it's not like fundamentally the case that one Marf read for 48 bytes is going to be cheaper than 3 Marf reads for 16 bytes each. That's not like fundamentally true. But in terms of like the real performance of the VM, that is like overwhelmingly true.
Oh, I believe that. We're on the same.
And so I really think that like we should be trying to optimize for getting as close to single Marf read writes as possible for the stacks transfers.
Okay, so the way we get resolution on this, I think, is we need to agree that that read count and write count contribute way more to the block fill than read length and write length.
Well, then 32 bytes of read length.
Well, I think I need to know, like, so the question I posed down here is kind of getting at the core of this issue. One Marf read for 48 bytes is tabulated as the same as by the VM as being greater than, less than, or equal to the cost of 3 Marf reads for 16 bytes each.
Well, here, actually, I guess I would say strictly less than, because it's the same number of bytes being read.
Okay.
So like read length will be identical in both cases, whereas Marf read is 1 and the other is Marf read of 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we are saying then that the when in the VM cost model, like I'm trying to keep in mind the big picture here, like bigger even than this, Ludo, of how we're going to measure Marf IO operations in the block fill itself, because that has a very non-trivial impact on the way in which we calculate transaction fees and the way in which we determine that a block is full for denial of service purposes. So is it safe to open an issue somewhere to say that when calculating the total block fill, we will heavily weight read count and write count relative to read length and write length?
I mean, you can certainly open an issue to track that.
But is that directionally correct?
That's directionally correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's also the reason these were separated in the cost model itself.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I just didn't know what those fields were because there's no comments on them. Okay. So I'm happy then to just take the current system that Ludo made with one Marf read and write for 48 bytes, knowing that when it comes time to calculate the block cost, we will make sure to weight Marf read and write operations much more so than just read runs or write runs.
Yeah.
Just an action item. I want to make sure we document that. Cool. Okay. So that can resolve that. The other issue was down here. One of the other changes made in the change requests is that there is now a stacks balance struct, which represents the lock state, number of tokens locked, number of tokens unlocked, and that now is serialized to a single object that is read and written to in the Marf. That's totally fine. That actually makes it much nicer to address this problem here of minimizing the number of Marf reads. But the other concern I have here is that if we make if we make it so that this view of the stacks balance can mutate independently of writes to the database, i.e. to keep that stacks balance view in sync with that database, then we are putting ourselves at long-term risk of accidentally forgetting to commit changes to a stacks balance, because it's easy to convince ourselves that this call here to like lock tokens is also doing some IO in the background. When I was originally writing this code, I considered doing this, making a separate struct to represent the lock state, and then decided against it because I wanted to make sure that whenever we mutate any lock state, we are also always hitting the database. Like this sort of thing just can't happen where you accidentally do one but not the other. I'm very much in favor of keeping it that way. Not because I don't believe that we can't write correct code, but because it makes it easier to avoid writing incorrect code. What do y'all think?
So I don't necessarily agree that one approach is more likely or less likely to end up with correct code, because if you think about like whatever this hypothetical future where we're trying to do something different than we're currently doing with the account state, in one system, like you have to fetch the account state out of the database. Maybe you're doing some mutations and then you restore it to the database.
Yep.
You write some code to do that. In the other approach, what this means is that like we're just introducing a new function on the stacks chain state, which is roughly doing the same thing. So it's like not obvious to me that one is going to enforce better coding practice than the other. Like these seems just like two different ways to represent basically the same thing.
So here's the difference between the two. In the first case, you can acquire a copy of the object, in this case, the stacks balance, in many more cases than you would if you were going to be committing changes to it. Whereas in the previous case, there's actually, backing up one sec, I'm not saying we get rid of stacks balance as a struct. I'm just saying we get rid of all of the mute self rep methods in stacks balance, right? So that we don't find ourselves in this position of forcing the developer to have to do two operations, i.e. mutate the stacks balance and then store the stacks balance, when in reality, these things will both be happening at the same time anyway. Like I don't believe that there is a world where you mutate the stacks balance and don't save it.
Right, but if you don't have mutable methods on this account struct, it forces you to clone. And like, there's no reason to just like force a clone.
Also, who are the developers we're trying to optimize for here? So it's like
Us.
developers of the, okay. I mean, that's this group and hope maybe like a slightly larger group, but it's going to be a fairly small group. And I think we can expect reasonable amount of like expertise and knowledge to be working in this code base. So I think we should be careful in making sort of a trade-off for a population that is fairly limited and specialized to begin with.
I mean, I've been bitten by this problem before. Like, this is not just coming out of the blue of accidentally forgetting to save something. Like, yes, this could result in doing a clone errand. At the same time, you don't even have to use the heap though, right? You could just construct a new object from an existing object with some changes. Like, I know that we don't like clones because they lead to heap fragmentation, but I'm not saying that it's a binary, but I don't think it's a binary choice. Like, you don't have to clone to create a new instance of an object in the first place. Like, it could live on a stack.
Regardless of where it's getting placed by the compiler, you would have to clone. Like, if you're not mutating the object, you have to clone it.
When are we going to mutate it and not store it?
It doesn't matter if you store it or not store it. Like, you have to clone. If you don't have mutable functions, like, you're creating a clone and then storing the clone. So you're just like buffering.
I don't understand where the storing comes from. The act of It will be the case. There are many places in the code base where you will want to get a copy of the stacks balance. Like the RESTful API is a good example. Whenever you're looking at balances to do like transaction admission, that's another example. But those are read-only copies. Whenever it's the case right now, at least in the code, when we need to mutate the balance for some reason, we are always storing the result immediately afterwards.
Can I just interject? I feel like, I mean, maybe this is a good discussion to have, but I also want to kind of weigh it against everything else that we still have to discuss. Like, is the issue of like mutable methods on this one data structure like worth, let's say, delaying Krypton or consuming much more time in this meeting? Like, I would like to get to some of the other issues that we still need to discuss as well.
We can come back to it. It's a subtle point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it? Sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, yeah. I don't think that this is a terribly important distinction. But it's sort of, I guess, the argument. But yeah, we can move on.
Okay. Would it be okay, Jude, like if you want to sort of continue to push for this, to maybe open a separate issue and we allow this PR to not be blocked by this particular feedback?
I'm just going to revert the change if I fix it later. So why take the more circuitous route?
I mean, then we're effectively saying that getting to a resolution here is a blocker for Krypton. And I think at least Aaron just said, and I agree, that it doesn't seem like that big of a decision that's worth delaying Krypton for, or spending that much cycles on. And others should chime in if folks disagree, but at the very least, let's get to some of the other issues and then we can circle back on this one.
Yeah, I would just plus one that I think a rule of thumb is like we should optimize for speed. I'll share separately once you guys are done on some of the more high level things that are going on.
All right, reviewing. I think we just talked about this. Aaron, this has been superseded, right?
Looking at the PR from Ludo, I think that it's merging into this branch.
Yeah, correct.
So,
But
yeah, so we could either change the base branch of Ludo's PR to next and then close this, or merge that and then merge this. That seems more complex of a structure. So maybe we should just change the base branch of Ludo's PR.
Okay. What PR number was that? 1827? It's this one, right? No,
yes, 1863.
Sorry, let me see if I can move this damn thing out of the way. 1863, thanks. I'll leave this open until we've merged 1863, and then we can close it.
Yeah, and this is the issue anyways, rather than the PR. I guess the PR is 1827.
Okay. Stacks lockup state. An API for retrieving the lockup state for stacking addresses. I think this is addressed by the change set PR for POX.
Yeah.
And sorry, I think we jumped straight into the board review. Did we talk through, Jude, the 6 issues that you had opened and kind of where you are with those?
I was getting to that because they're also.
Okay. Okay, all right.
Sorry, I'm trying to remember what issue number this is. It's not this one, it's lockup, it's 1850. I'll go ahead and close this, sound good? Well, actually no, just leave it open until the PR merges.
Yeah.
Same with delegation state. Well, actually, this is not addressed at all now. It got taken
Right.
out. So that just remains open.
Yeah.
I guess it's going to be iceboxed, since I'm still waiting from feedback from management about some questions about how delegation should work and whether or not pooling will be involved.
Yeah.
This is addressed by 1850. And this is also addressed by 1850. All right, in progress. Actually, I think this is now in review, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry, do you happen to remember the number, Aaron, of the PR?
1876 looks like.
Thanks. Put that in review. So this is in progress still, synchronizing the bit vectors. It's part of the networking PR. It's mostly tested. Matt, how are we doing on this?
This is in progress. I'm hoping to have a PR this week, maybe tomorrow. There's
Awesome.
a couple kind of implementation details that I think I'll just ask Aaron now that you're back. I don't think they're too crazy. It's just like an efficiency thing. So when we're watching for the thresholds to be crossed, so there's the first threshold, like when a certain amount of names have been registered. And then the second one, when we want to do the block import or like the data file dump. So the current implementation I have is pretty much stateless, which I don't even think that can be correct. But if it can, I think it's really inefficient because for each name registration, I think I have to check if the threshold is reached and then kind of iterate backwards to see when, at what block that threshold is reached. So I'm pretty sure I have to just store those block data in those block heights inside SQLite or some other data store. But yeah, I can take that as sync or just open a PR with what I have so far.
I know that there are database methods in the namedb.py file that will let you iterate through the set of operations that happen in a block. You could potentially use that to determine how many names were registered after a block in this namespace and have like a side SQLite database that just keeps track of that for you, so you don't have to do a whole scan each block.
Gotcha. That's kind of what I was thinking. Because yeah, right now I was about to implement some kind of just block backwards to find the block at which the threshold is crossed without having to create like a new SQL table or any of that kind of stuff. But I don't think that will work too well.
Okay, so I'm going to just write this in here. If you look in, it's blockstack/lib/virtualchainhooks.py, I think is the file. There's I'm putting this in quotes because I can't remember the name of the method, but it is there. There is like an end of block callback that will be invoked that you can, that gets called once one Bitcoin block is processed. And you can hook into that. You can add your own methods there. You can have it create or open your own database and have it look at, say, the last block and see if there's any new names in the .minor namespace or something like that. And that way, incrementally build it up.
Gotcha. Yeah, all the code I have so far is within one of the functions that gets called by that hook. But yep. So if I do have to end up storing state, should I create like a new table in the primary database? So I think it's called like name set, the module, or should I do like a different table or a different database file or something else?
It's fine if you do it in one of the existing databases because the current code will back up that database and will make it available for fast sync snapshots. So I think it's probably a better idea just to extend the current database instead of trying to update the fast sync and the backup logic so it knows to capture that database file as well.
Okay, cool. And then I guess one other quick question. So I'm trying to figure out a good way to have decent tests for this with the integration test harness. And it seems like that mostly operates through RPC. So I'm wondering if, so like, you know, when a couple of these thresholds are reached, should there be like a new RPC endpoint that the integration tests can query in order to like confirm the correct behavior? Or is there like a more direct way to do that without creating new RPC endpoints?
I think you can get the number of names in a namespace through an RPC method already. If that's true, then we may not need to do much here, right? Let me just quickly check the API. I'm pretty sure you can do this already.
I was thinking like the unit test might want to do something like confirm at which block the initial signal threshold was reached, and then confirm that the import block threshold was reached.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, like it's fine to just add API methods for this particular purpose, just because it's a highly specialized API, and the node, this software is going to go bye-bye once Stacks 2.0 launches. So I don't think we have to worry too much about compatibility here. It's fine to add new API endpoints if assuming no one else has any problem with that.
Okay, cool, sounds good.
Alrighty. Oh, sorry, I just moved that. New issues.
Wait, sorry, one sec, Jude. I think I forgot to add the correct milestone to the issue I've been working on, which is, yeah, apologies, but maybe you could just bring that one up. I think it's, oh, wait, let me find the number. 1867. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that progress is being made here. This is the additions to SIP 006 about cost voting. And yeah, really appreciate all of the comments, and I'm still working on kind of fleshing out some more of the details here. These first couple of commits were just kind of more of like a broader idea of how this could work, synthesizing a bunch of this information from multiple places and trying to flesh it out more. And yeah, Jude left a bunch of comments last week and gave me a good place to start in terms of kind of ironing out more of the detail. So yeah, I'm still working on that, and also starting to write a potential contract for voting if we wind up going in that direction, just to kind of help me explore if that's actually what we want to do. Yeah. But yeah, I'll have kind of, I think this week I'll debrief with Aaron about this PR and likely have a bunch of questions for him.
I think broadly speaking, that's a good idea to have a contract for it. In fact, we have a way of adding contracts to the boot code. Can just add a comment for that right here.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm still thinking that that's the right direction as well. So yeah, I've started writing some code there.
Cool. Awesome. I know we're definitely running short on time here. Let's see, dynamically adjusting minimum stack.
Can we maybe just focus on going through, Jude, your issues first before we review everything else that's on the board? I think you talked about sort of one of the issues, but there are 6 that you opened. Or maybe just, I mean, I think the long story short is like, I want us to get a better estimate of the work remaining in light of the PRs in review, the PRs that are not yet in review, and you know how much time it takes for us to, let's say, iterate on and merge on would be good to walk out of this meeting with a slightly better sense than, next week or the week after that.
Do you want me to just add comments to each of them about how long I think it will take to implement each of them?
Sure. Or I mean, if you want to just talk us through, and more importantly, now that Aaron is also back, also discuss, are there things that folks can help you with? Do you think there's a lot on your plate right now? Are there things that, where other people can step in, where we can load balance a little bit more, or you feel like it's probably just best for you to continue to just tackle it all?
It seems that we're in a position where some in-flight PRs are also blocked on me, as well as this code. I don't know how you all feel about just skipping my review on this, if that would be preferable, and I can just review them after Krypton. Because,
Yeah, I think that for most of these PRs, if both Ludo and I review them, like I would feel pretty comfortable.
All right, that would actually help a lot, because then you can go ahead and get 3 or 4 of these merged in today potentially, without waiting for me to look at them.
Cool.
Does that work, Walker?
Sure. And then, so I think you had mentioned that you have maybe 4 of the 6 issues implemented and 2 of them tested. On the remaining sort of 5th and 6th, do you have a sense of kind of where you are in terms of the implementation?
Sure. So the ones that I've not started implementing yet are this one: reject a downloaded block before storing it if the downloaded block inventory data wasn't validated. I don't think the implementation is that complex. I think it's just a matter of checking the inventory state when the block arrives and seeing whether or not it's the same as it was when the download was started. This right here is going to be a bit more interesting. Right now we maintain a lookup table, a cached lookup table that maps between consensus hashes and whether or not, and an option for a block header hash that indicates whether or not the sortition that consensus hash identifies selected a block. And that is used in turn to inform the block downloader as to what the as to whether or not there are blocks. Sorry, it's used to help the block downloader generate requests, and it's also, I think, it might be used in a couple other places. I'm not remembering. Anyway, that's not important. The important part is this state lives inside the stacks chain state, but because this cache can now be invalidated because a POX reorg can happen, I don't believe that the stacks chain state is the best place to store it, because we could find ourselves in a position where we have multiple copies of it, or maybe there's extra the invalidation work starts to violate layers of concern. I was just thinking about instead moving this cache into the peer network itself, since the peer network is the only consumer for this cache, and it already has to process POX invalidations, or at least it has to react to them when they happen. I don't think it's that huge of an ask. I think it's most of the work there is just refactoring. It's not even that much refactoring. It's just taking it out of stacks chain state and putting it into peer network.
Okay.
I can talk about the other networking issues.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Sure, this issue here. Oh, I'm sorry, I should do this. This is already done. This is making sure that we don't rely on the consensus hashes for determining whether or not a remote node has a consistent view of the burn chain state. That can be satisfied using just a burn header hash, and that's already done. This issue here is an interesting consideration, because while a inventory request is in flight, it is possible for a burn chain block to arrive or a stacks block to arrive and invalidate the network, the peer network's view of the POX state. If that happens, the networking code, specifically the inventory processing part of the networking code, needs to invalidate the inventory state that was affected by the arrival of that new stacks block. So for example, if a POX bit for reward cycle X flips from a 0 to a 1, i.e. due to the arrival of a stacks block while an inventory request is in flight, the inventory processing logic needs to recognize that this happened, and it needs to happen. It needs to reject the inventory message it just got, and it needs to drop all inventory state it has for reward cycles X and higher, and then restart fetching that inventory state. I think the code is done. It's not completely tested though. I'm still working on testing it. This right here, per node POX inventory synchronization state machines, that's done. I'm still testing it. There are still some problems that I'm not sure what's causing them, but I'm sure it's some small stupid thing somewhere that just needs me to look at it for long enough. Because this was working before. We know how to make these things work. This is done. The new get POX inv and reply with a POX inv, those are finished. I think that's it for networking. I know there was that earlier issue on networking that kind of encapsulated hints of all of these things, but per DeWalker's recommendation, I broke it into a bunch of different issues.
Yeah. For 1870, that seems like something that the chains coordinator struct would be able to notify the peer network code about rather immediately.
Okay.
Because it's the chains coordinator that's actually doing that flipping of an ancestor bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is your implementation adding like callbacks to the chains coordinator, or is it like trying to reread from the database like downstream?
Right now it's polling. It's doing the latter.
Okay.
That's probably going to be slow in practice. So we will want to do have the chains coordinator just inform it.
Yeah. Yeah, polling is probably fine for now, but we should make a note that this is something that would probably be useful to have the chains coordinator trigger.
It's fine to just have the peer network refresh its view of the POX database, like wholesale, when it gets informed that a anchor block bit flipped, right?
Yeah, that should be fine. The only place in the code where it's like not okay to like try to adjust based on just rereading the database entirely is in the chains coordinator itself, because it's kind of a it would trigger like a never-ending recursion to try and like solve for bit vector updates and stuff like that. Everywhere else in the code, it's fine.
I don't quite understand what you said. Can you try saying it again, please?
Sure. So if you're trying to get the canonical POX bit vector at any point in time, if you're not in the chains coordinator struct, you can just read it from the sort DB. But in the chains coordinator struct, it can't do that because it's the thing that's trying to keep the sort DB up to date in the first place.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I won't modify the chains coordinator to the greatest extent that I can.
Cool.
Okay, we are well over time. Do we need to finish going through the board, or do you want to just end the meeting?
I had a quick question. Like, I think.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. We need 11:30, right? I thought we ended at 11.
Yeah, we were thinking of doing like some sort of a private deployment and then a public deployment. Like, you guys want to fill me in a little bit about that plan?
Well, the plan was that if we have all of the code changes ready before we push Krypton to the public testnet, we would deploy it internally just to make sure that there is nothing that's kind of obviously broken, configuration changes. So just do some end-to-end testing internally before we launch it to the public testnet. But from my interpretation, and folks should chime in here, of the current state is, I would say, Jude, you're probably still a few days away from getting a PR out for review.
Probably, just to count on that.
And so, let's see, we're Tuesday. even if we have a PR out for review before the end of the week, it's unlikely that it'll merge by the end of the week, which means that we're talking about maybe early next week. And assuming that all of the other in-flight PRs, we're able to get them merged by then, that means we're kind of code complete early next week, let's say, optimistically. At that point, we can do an internal deployment. And I think from a DevOps and infrastructure perspective, everything is ready to go. As soon as we have an image, I think doing that internal deployment should be pretty quick and getting some testing there before we push out to the public testnet, assuming we don't uncover any issues on the internal deployment. So that's putting us, sometime mid to end of next week.
Diwakar, that is correct. We are pretty much ready to deploy this whenever you guys are ready to do it.
Mm-hmm. Does that timeline sound good to everyone? This is the time to flag or escalate if you think this is also very optimistic.
It might be optimistic, but I think that timeline seems fine to me. This sort of reminds me though that in the estimation discussion that we had, something that could be useful is if we're scoring these, if we grade these issues by how long we expect them to take, we write the estimation down, we can at least see how off we are in our estimations, so that when we have, if we want to apply a multiplier factor in the future, we actually have data to convey how far we're missing our estimates by.
Yeah, if you continue using ZenHub, we could use that. ZenHub does have a due date feature that we could employ.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea, because then at least we're measuring. We're not going to improve our estimations if we're not measuring our estimations. So.
And after the public deploy, I think we give it a little while to kind of monitor the chain before we more publicly talk about hey, we think that phase 3 is successfully deployed. How long of a time frame is that usually?
Not really. I think after the internal deployment, once that looks good, at least from my perspective, it's totally fine to say that Krypton is launched. Of course, we'll continue to find and fix issues on the testnet. That's the whole point of having the testnet. So,
sure.
So as soon as we deploy it publicly, I think in terms of communicating externally, I think that's totally fine to start doing that.
Sounds good. So I think, we are basically looking at the week of September 21st.
Yep.
But likely not before, let's call it Wednesday, 23rd.
Yeah.
Right.
Since you're on the call, Munib, is there anything else that you wanted to add? You had mentioned that there are a few other higher level things that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think it's basically around the timing, right? A bunch of people are pinging me with all sorts of previous communications, and I think maybe on the forum, the Argo one was announced in June, early June or something like that. So that's roughly 4 months. It was 4 months ago. And similarly, other, I'm surprised people have screenshots of Telegram messages and whatnot. They're resurfacing everything. So I was just basically thinking that we shouldn't even talk about mainnet launch at all. On the roadmap, I've already basically updated it to fall 2020. And then I've kind of made a joke about when mainnet.co is a website now. So every time someone asks when is it launching, I'm just going to type when mainnet.co. It goes to GitHub. But I do think that getting a better estimate after phase 3 is launched can be very helpful. Right? So what I'm trying to do right now is that there's all sorts of speculation going on around when mainnet is launching. I'm just going to work with the growth team to update all of that content, or try to get that updated. Some of that is not under our control, to just focus on phase 3 Krypton, and then set the communication that once phase 3 is successfully launched, we will try to have an exercise of coming up with a better estimate for what happens afterwards.
That sounds good.
That's all from my side.
All right. Great. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, we'll see you on Discord.
All right. Take care, everyone.